Hi everyone, thanks for joining us for today's webinar. My name is Sling and I'm with the Informa Connect Series. So today we'll be presenting the webinar on International Schools Post-COVID-19, a market insight webinar as presented by Mr. Sam, who is the head of Asia Research, ISC Research. So ISC Research is the leading provider of market and data intelligence on K-12 English medium international schools. And this webinar is hosted as part of the Second International Schools APEC conference, which is happening from 15 to 18 of September. And the conference will be delivered digitally. So you can find out more information by clicking the link that my colleague will send over at the chat box. And this session will be ongoing for about an hour, with Sam presenting for about 35 minutes, followed by a 15 to 20 minutes Q&A. So before I hand over the time to Sam, there are a number of admin matters for me to bring your attention to. So feel free to ask your questions by clicking the Q&A button at the bottom panel. Because of the limited time that we have for Q&A, so you feel free to upvote the questions that you would like us to address. Of course, we will address them in the first instance once we get to the Q&A session. And also during the Q&A session, we allow attendees to speak up or comment. So feel free to raise your hand if you'd like to make a comment, and I'll unmute you for that session to sort of speak to Sam. And lastly, the webinar recording will be sent to your email within 2 to 3 working days. So without further ado, let me sort of introduce you to today's webinar speaker. Sam, please.
Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for joining me today. I'd like to start by thanking Informa for taking the time to invite me to attend the conference. Hopefully you can all see my screen there. So yeah, today I will be, I can just get my screen working a bit here. Okay, so today I'll be discussing the opportunities, practices and challenges faced in the international schools market now and in the near future. So as already mentioned, my name's Sam Fraser. I'm head of research at ISC. More specifically today in this session, I'll share regional intelligence and data on the international schools market with a focus on China as well. Details of how international schools are coping with COVID-19 and adapting business and operational models. Insights into the medium and long-term consequences of COVID-19 on the international schools market too. So for those of you who are not familiar with ISC Research, we support all sectors within the international schools market. Our data and intelligence largely provides business due diligence for the expansion of existing international schools and the development of brand new ones, of course. Informs school groups regarding acquisition. Our research provides the market understanding required by education suppliers wishing to develop a presence in the market. It supports universities, many of which engage strategically with international schools because of the high caliber of students, obviously. And importantly, we keep international schools informed on the market, guiding school leaders with their strategic planning, benchmarking, recruitment, and school development. All of the trends and market intelligence that I'm sharing with you today are available in our reports. Some of these are free and readily accessible to you. Please feel free to get in touch if you want to access these. I'll be happy to share any information required. ISC is an organisation. We're based in the UK, where we have a large team of desk-based researchers, report writers, analysts, and so on. Our aim is really to speak with around 2,000 international schools globally, with over 1,000 of those being based in either Asia or the Middle East, which we see as the current key area for growth. Much of the research involves face-to-face or online interviews with school heads, which allows us to determine largely how markets are developing and what's influencing market change. This is, of course, particularly of interest to many right now. So, firstly, let's take a dive into the global international schools market and have a look at how things have changed. So, the traditional model of an international school in the 90s was either as an embassy or community school, predominantly serving the dependents of expatriate professionals. Schools would either deliver a nationalistic US or UK curriculum and teach in the English language largely. Back then, the majority of students in international schools were, as many of you are already aware, Western expatriates. Today, this model has been replaced by a much broader range of school types, serving a wide range of student demographics, with expatriates from both the East and the West, and a huge increase in the number of local children attending international schools. There are a growing number of bilingual schools as well, where English is just one of the languages of learning, and now there are a wider range of curricula on offer too. From our research, we're aware that US and British styles of teaching, learning, and qualifications remain extremely popular and underpin, in many cases, the learning in many schools, but that's albeit within an international context, largely. The coronavirus is undoubtedly going to impact the sector, but by how much, we're really yet to know. But the movement of people around the world, as we're seeing day in, day out, has been affected and will be affected for the short term. And online solutions for learning and teaching may become more prevalent as time goes on. Intelligence gathered by the field research team suggests that a growing number of international schools are already using online learning platforms to deliver a blended learning approach. And many other schools can learn a lot from understanding and experience these schools have already acquired. We're, as an organisation, we're going to keep our ears to the ground and keep tracking the market to change, and we hope to have further updates in the new academic year. Many of the reasons driving market growth are likely to continue post-coronavirus, although we are aware that some of these may change. So from our perspective, the key current drivers for international schools would be initially governments in developing countries now recognise international schools as a route to improving K-12 education provision. Restrictions that have existed in some countries impacting the number of local children attending international schools are increasingly being lifted. Malaysia, Thailand, and most recently Vietnam are notable cases. As I'm sure many of you are aware, Malaysia and Thailand allow now 100% local student enrolment, if schools should choose to do so, of course. Vietnam has increased local student admissions in international schools to 49.99% as part of its Decree 86, and that was released in 2017. And so we've seen the impact these changes have made, not only on the education systems, but on a broader scale across these countries too. Following on from this, there is an increase in the demand for international school places from expatriate professionals originating from Asia rather than the West. Many of these expats have been replacing some of the more costly Western workers. No longer are businesses offering generous benefits packages, which include the funding of education for employees' dependents. I say no longer, some still are, but we're aware that this is less prevalent than perhaps of years gone by. So this changing demographic is resulting in an increased demand for more affordable international schools, where school fees are more manageable within a parent's salary. This is why we foresee the mid-price sector of the market being an area of expansion post the coronavirus. Today, parents want a curriculum and learning environment to be international in context, leading to qualifications that are valued by not only universities, but also companies around the world. This has created extensive demand for such curricula like the IB, for example. However, local context also remains important for many parents who want their children to maintain strong connections with their own language and cultures. And we've seen that, that follows on from, a bilingual type of desired international school requirement in countries such as Indonesia and Vietnam and what have you. There continues to be a demand for premium schools. And one of the areas of the market that we've seen major growth in recent years is the number of independent school brands that have been opening, such as the likes of Dulwich Harrow, Wellington, Dwight, King's College. Many wealthy, aspirational parents are extremely brand conscious and value heritage when it comes to their child's education, where only the very best will do, of course. This is why these brands can be so popular. As a result of COVID-19, parents who have traditionally sent their child to board at an independent school overseas may keep their child at home and seek out an international sister school of an independent school brand like the ones I've already mentioned. So this is perhaps good news for those branded schools abroad at the moment and could lead to a further growth in international branded schools overseas. Following on from these other key growth areas, we would suggest that perhaps the biggest growth driver is the one that's fueled the market for the last 20 years. And that's, the provision of learning in the English language, acquiring qualifications that are globally recognized, and thus providing the most reliable route to higher education. Only time will tell how COVID-19 will impact the enormous movement of international students from undergrad and postgrad study. Universities may well need to adapt to attract the same number of students, possibly offering distance learning or establishing a sister campus presence in key countries. And we're aware that a number of universities have already done this, such as the Nottingham University in China, and Monash University in Malaysia, and there are various others out there too. So this slide illustrates how, and some of you may have seen the slide already, but in the year 2000, there were 2.1 million internationally mobile higher education students, and today that number has increased to around 5.5 million. And prior to the coronavirus pandemic, we were expecting to see growth up to nearly 8 million students by 2025. Most young people are unlikely to let coronavirus curb their academic and career ambitions, and therefore we foresee the market continuing to grow, but we watch and wait for the data to corroborate this thinking. So this huge increase in undergraduate student mobility has mainly come from a growing wealthy Asian middle class who have a strong desire for their child to receive a Western university degree. This growth in international schools in Asia, due to the demand alongside COVID-19, is likely to add a greater level of competition to schools in regions such as Europe, where there's been a historical trend for large cohorts coming out of Asia. Much is expected of an international school today, and there's also a high expectation by many academically aspirational parents about the universities that their child will enter as well. So some parents are highly influenced by a top university brand that they may recognise, of course, such as Harvard, Cambridge, Oxford, and so on, and will choose a school solely based on pathway success. Part of the challenge of admissions managers now, as it of course is for college counsellors, is to educate parents about pathway success and the importance of best fit university choice rather than, of course, top rank. Many respectable international schools are having these professional conversations as part of their strategy planning, so that realistic expectations are being presented to parents at the earliest possible stage. Following on then, looking at a bit of student mobility. So even with the impact of coronavirus, the number of international students seeking quality higher education will likely continue to increase. With that being said, the location students desire may well change as a result of the current pandemic. On the screen, you'll notice that between 2001 and 2017, mobile higher education students' attendance at the UK and US universities didn't increase in line with other locations. And in fact, attendance from globally mobile students at US universities decreased proportionately, with other countries getting exposure for many things, including value for money. During the 17-year period, China, as you can see on the screen, that appeared from virtually nowhere to capture 10% of the market share, in Canada from a similar position, 6% of the market share. Australia as well moved from 4% to 7% market share. As we've mentioned, costs, of course, would be one of the factors involved in this change in student migration. Other reasons would be distance, cultural familiarity, safety, economic security, maintaining local values, and opportunities for post-university visas as well, playing a big part. Statistical forecasts will have to, of course, be rewritten to factor in the current coronavirus pandemic. And of course, ISC research will share information about this as and when we can get a gauge of what's happened. So let's take a look at some of the current market data from ISC. The statistics on the screen are from January 2020. Since the year 2000, the number of English medium international schools has increased by 343%, and the number of students aged between 3 and 18 attending these schools has grown by over 500%, 5.82 million, which is a huge increase. The number of teachers and leaders employed by international schools has increased to 554,000, and the total fee income is perhaps one of the most staggering, which has increased from less than $5 billion in the year 2000 up to an increase of up to 54.8 billion, which is over 1,000% increase within that time frame. So you can see why investors are perhaps very interested in the international education market at the moment. The following breakdown shows the entire international schools market today By types of schools, as you can see, bilingual provision is increasing. Whilst governments are around the world, and particularly in Asia, welcome the continued expansion of the international school sector in their countries, they insist that national students must continue to learn in relation to their culture, traditions, and language. And we can see that in countries like mentioned already, Indonesia, Vietnam, Saudi Arabia, as key examples of pushing for the culture, traditions, and language to be implemented within an international school setting. The number of independent schools brands from the UK, US, and Australia is also increasing in the market. Of course, they only make up 1% as of 2020. And although these brands remain a very small sector within the wider international market, these schools are highly visible and are considered some of the most premium and costly schools, offering a Western education, heritage, and prestige that many brand-conscious wealthy families want. This is a bit of a mock-up, this slide, of a couple of different things. So you can see a macro view of the international schools market in terms of regional spread and curriculum orientation. A UK-oriented curriculum continues to be the most popular at 30% of all international schools. That being said, many adapt the curriculum to draw relevance to host countries and student demographics. The same can be said for the US, with 19% of all international schools following US-style curriculum. The the international curricula that are not aligned with with any particular country are very popular with international schools. The most popular being the IB, as I just said, with its programs for all ages. Some or all of these IB programs are delivered in 15% of all schools. Another increasingly popular curriculum, which isn't on the board there, is Cambridge International. So we'll be keeping a close eye on developments in international schools for Cambridge International. Slide also shows the regions where today's international schools are located. As you can see by the screen, a huge number of those schools are located in Asia, with the second largest group of international schools being on the continent of Europe. When we drill down to the sub-regions, you can see that the top four, unsurprisingly, are all in Asia. Western Asia, which is basically the Middle East, Eastern Asia, Southern East Asia, and Southern Asia. And then following on from there, you can see, if we dive down a little bit deeper into country level, you can see the top 10 countries for the number of international schools. That China is by far having the most international schools, with India, UAE, and Pakistan closely following. Similar type of graph, but focusing on student enrollment solely. You can see that UAE has fewer schools, but by far more students, 678,000. And that number's pretty much doubled within 10 years. The majority of international schools in the UAE cater towards a full K-12 education. In China, it's a bit different, because the large number of the international schools focus on one particular age phase, such as kindergartens and post-grade 9 schools, as well as a significant number of stream options within local schools. This means that average campus cohorts are smaller in China, but compared with the likes of the UAE. Therefore, in China, we have more schools, but fewer students. So this slide just focuses really on the growth in schools over the last 10 years in 3 countries with the largest presence. So you'll see that China's international schools have increased by 166% within the last 10 years, the UAE by 81%, whilst India and the international schools in India have increased by a massive 284% within a 10-year period. And we, IFC Research, really see that India is a key area for growth over the next 5 to 10 years, not just for new schools, but for school acquisition. International schools recruit skilled and qualified teachers from countries where education is globally revered and delivered in the English language. Leading countries for recruitment are North America and the UK, as well as some other European countries like Ireland and the Netherlands, as well as, of course, Australia and New Zealand. More international schools are also realizing the benefits of hiring a cohort of local teachers, and this is as a way to bring important local context, language, and cultural understanding to their school communities. This can, of course, also help with employment challenges and will be particularly important to many international schools in the wake of the coronavirus. Some international schools are setting very good practice for providing development training, upskilling, and globally recognized qualification routes for some local staff. There will, without doubt, be recruitment challenges in the short and longer term following the coronavirus, as there potentially would have been if coronavirus, were not to have occurred anyway. So we're keeping a very close eye on the management of recruitment in key areas over the next 6 to 12 months. Following slide, you can see the average annual tuition fees generated by international schools. These vary dramatically by school type and by location. The average tuition fees for all types of international schools globally is $9,356 exactly. That's pretty specific there. Premium international schools are charging an average of $17,800, and the overseas sister schools of independent school brands are charging an average of $23,500 each year. Looking at this via a country focus, we can see that China is one of the countries with the highest fees at $16,400 versus the international school fees average in the UAE at $8,500, which is quite surprising, as there are a number of premium schools in the UAE, but with the number of schools there in total, there are also a huge amount of mid-market plus schools. A new emerging market is, of course, as we've already mentioned, the mid-market price point fees schools. This sector is expanding in many countries. Some of the higher cost international schools may well have to adjust their fees next year, and following on from there, in order to respond to the economic impact of COVID-19. We're aware, from speaking to schools this year already, that discounts are being offered in a number of different ways, and that schools are considering reducing fees. International schools are, on the whole, doing a great job of preparing students for university entrance. International school students, on average, achieve a higher examination success level from the exit exams than students in all school types around the world. For A or international A levels, which are offered in 17% of all international schools, the percentage of A or A star grades for students was 34% compared to 25.5% achieved in UK schools. For the IBDP, which is offered in 15% of international schools, the research average point score was 33.6 out of a maximum of 45, as I'm sure you all know. But the global average for all IBDP students was 29.63 in 2019. And for the advanced placement, the AP, which is offered in 7% of all international schools, out of a maximum grade of 5, international school students achieved an average AP exam score of 3.54 compared to a global average of 2.91. These are the 3 most popular examinations offered at international schools today. Some international schools also offer other options, of course, sometimes alongside one of these or as an alternative. Additional qualifications that we're seeing growth in are the IBCP, which is, of course, the career-related program for IB, the American High School Diploma, one of the Canadian provinces' high school diplomas, or a national qualification allowing students who wish to remain in country to access the domestic universities. And these national qualifications being offered in international schools are growing exponentially. Incredibly, many universities are still struggling with the translation of credentials and their understanding of how different qualifications and their grades compare to each other. Many British universities still don't provide a fair tariff, many would say, for the IB diploma or the AP. King's College in London set a standard for the UK when it lowered its tariff point from the IBDP, but many other British universities are yet to follow suit. With the growth of the emerging higher education market in many other countries, universities need to make sure that they are really well informed and fair with their admissions requirements when it comes to tariffs. You can read more about this in our Pathway from International Schools to Higher Education report, which includes qualification details and selection processes as well. And this is a free report, so if you're interested in getting hold of that one, please get in touch with me. After the webinar, I'll be happy to share that with you. So let's take a bit of a dive into the China market then. So here you can see the growth trends of all types of international schools in China for January of each year, being 2014, 17, and 20, as you can see on the screen. The compound annual growth rate since 2014 of international and international Chinese-owned private schools in China is 7.3%, and the student enrollment compound annual growth rate is 9.4%. Most of the growth has been in international Chinese-owned private schools, which can deliver learning to Chinese children, as opposed to the schools for the children of foreign nationals, which are largely open to those who are foreign. We'll dive into that a little bit deeper here, actually. So here you can see the international schools market in China segmented by school type. And this is based on our data from March of this year, so very recent. The international Chinese-owned private schools are the largest sector of the market by a long way, with 657 schools teaching over 269,000 students. This sector is unlikely to see any, I would say, it's unlikely to see any long-term impacts, but of course, that's with a caveat that we don't really know, and that's off the back of coronavirus. However, the schools for the children of foreign nationals, which, as I just mentioned, are predominantly filled with expat children, are likely to be impacted noticeably. We as an organisation will research and have more intelligence about this side of the market in our report that we're going to be writing for China, which will be available later this academic year. Average tuition fees are anticipated to be impacted by the effects of coronavirus too. Many schools in China have already talked about fee freezes next year. Again, this will be included in our China report, so get in touch if you're interested in hearing more about that one. Next slide, so you can see the demographics of teaching staff at all types of international schools in China. Many expatriate teachers currently employed by schools in China were out of the country when COVID-19 hit. This was because of the Chinese New Year, of course. As a result, many international schools did not get all their teachers back into the country before temporary bans on foreigners returning were implemented. These schools are offering a hybrid approach at the moment for the remainder of the academic year, using the teachers they do have to provide the classroom teaching and asking the teachers who are still overseas to continue with online learning. And this is pretty common in many countries right now. Schools in China and further afield are, of course, they're concerned with getting the teachers that are currently outside of the country back, but they're also faced with the potential situation of not having teachers in the country in time for the start of the new academic year, which would be slightly disastrous. Schools as yet do not know when ministries might lift the temporary ban on foreigners returning, nor do they know when countries might start to issue new work visas and residency permits again. This means that the schools do not know what the impact will be regarding new recruitment. I'm aware one school actually in Shanghai is currently trying to get over 100 new existing staff members into the country for the 2020-21 academic calendar, which, as you can imagine, is no easy task. And that school is not alone in those numbers. So, our thoughts go out to a lot of those head teachers who are struggling at the moment. But we do understand on a positive that many international schools intend to honour any new contracts. This isn't the case across the board, and it's hard for this to occur, but school teachers largely are looking to honour new contracts and get their teachers into new countries and settled as soon as possible. So let's focus a bit more on COVID-19, which is likely to be the reason why you've tuned in today. So we're going to talk a bit about what we've covered, or I will, about what we currently know about its impact on the international schools market. International schools have been very proactive with regards to sharing incredibly valuable knowledge, helping many others as the coronavirus has taken hold throughout the world. In many respects, this has driven a feeling of a greater sense of community amongst schools that would normally be considered competitors, which is a bit of a silver lining. Schools have been forthcoming in sharing their practices of the rapid transition to online learning. Schools have also been quick to share details of challenges they faced due to school closures, including managing parental demands, student engagement, and the well-being of students and staff thrust into online learning. Some schools are now in a position to start sharing the challenges they're facing during campuses reopenings as well. I'd like to take this opportunity, to thank the international schools who have openly shared practical solutions during the pandemic. ISC has been tracking global developments impacting the international schools market via a number of different methods. Since early March, we've provided details of all school closures and reopenings by country and all examination changes. Our LinkedIn and Twitter pages have shared best practices by schools, as well as free and easily accessible resources. Our blog features regularly posted updates and practical advice for schools and, of course, organisations. The April issue of our International School Leader magazine, ISL, which is free to all school leaders, shared some valuable solutions-focused features related to the coronavirus. And we have a free white paper now available that reviews the resilience of the international schools market through previous crises. An interesting read nonetheless. We're also collecting feedback from international school leaders. This is on various aspects of practice related to campus closures and how they think international schools will be affected in the medium and long term. So we'll be offering a few more blogs, white papers, and free reports over the coming months. On a global scale, schools in 153 countries throughout the world are currently closed and education is being severely disrupted. However, a significant number of international schools have proved themselves to be well prepared for unexpected crises. Here are just some of the things occurring in many international schools right now. Many have been perceived as being relatively successful in delivering well-structured distance learning during their campus closures, with some international schools developing and rolling out extensive e-learning programs as closures progressed. Schools are expressing an interest in using asynchronous and synchronous structures for teaching in the future, and some of these schools are focusing on this strategy directly off the back of teaching by distance learning. Schools have mentioned specifically using software such as Avid, Kahoot, Pro, Tapestry, Class Dojo, Seesaw, Screencast, Teams, Power of School, and a whole host of others. Many others. So some organisations are waiving subscription fees as well for their products, which is mentioned by a number of heads as a big help. Some international schools are still assessing student progress whilst distance learning continues, whilst others are working towards a revised set of learning outcomes. Examinations by all the leading global examinations bodies have been cancelled, and international schools are responding to summative analysis requirements. Many college counsellors are guiding final year students with their university acceptances and plans for the first semesters of the new academic year, which for many universities looks likely to begin with distance learning. Some international schools are guiding parents with the support they need to facilitate distance learning for their children, and most schools are being accessible and responsive to parental concerns. Again, some international schools are providing crucial wellbeing support for their staff and students. Some have introduced safeguarding protocols for distance learning, and I'd actually say rather than some, most international schools are providing wellbeing support in some way, shape or form. Schools have also been looking to develop online learning opportunities for Year 11 and Year 13 students who will soon have their grades predicted. Schools recognise that once grades are submitted, there are still opportunities to engage students in preparation for the next stage of their academic journey. Programs have been developed to focus on using the time available to add genuine value. Schools are working with external suppliers such as Be the Change, Own Academy, Sumus, LinkedIn Learning offering pre-university skills courses, and a whole bunch of others. This has, of course, been a massively challenging time for all international schools, and the important social interaction of learning has been noticeable in its absence. Many schools, if not most schools as well, have been offering live online lessons to generate some group interaction between students and teachers. On a positive, schools in China and a few other locations such as South Korea and Vietnam are reopening their doors to students as social distancing measures in these countries are relaxed. Being several weeks ahead of most other countries, these schools will act as laboratories in many respects for reopening procedures that many others will use to guide their own practices. That being said, it would be absolutely naive to think there won't be any backward steps in certain locations where cases increase again due to relaxations. We're aware ourselves that areas in China and South Korea, such as Incheon and Jilin, are already experiencing setbacks with school closures resulting once more. And, you know, from our perspective and many others, managing setbacks will also be a part of the puzzle, of course. Where schools are reopening, field researchers have gathered details of the plans some international schools are taking. Schools initially are focused on opening grade phases, beginning with, i.e. grades 9 and 12 in some Chinese provinces. I know China, as of Monday, opened grades in SCFN schools from grade 5 up, and international Chinese private-owned schools from grade 4 up. Schools are required to introduce some new systems, and many international schools have taken further measures too. These include procedures protecting campus access, such as temporary checks of all people and QR health codes, heightened sanitization regimes, systems to limit large gatherings, such as staggering dining plans and assemblies broadcast into classrooms, adaptations to student transportation, and strict procedures for managing suspected virus cases as they occur. Schools are setting out detailed assessments of individual students to identify learning gaps and preparing plans to address these as well. Some schools are considering extending their school day, providing weekend lessons, or offering summer schools, or extending term times to readdress these gaps. And we've heard that, you know, a couple of schools in China are looking to extend their term times, which is really interesting. So we'll keep a close eye on that and hopefully update the community as and when we find out more information. Parents have many concerns. Apart from gaps in their child's learning, many parents are, you know, demanding fee reimbursements or reductions. Schools that have maintained effective distance learning provision have more reason to debate such challenges. However, some schools are considering fee rebates, and we're aware that some already have, or one-off bursaries for families experiencing temporary financial difficulty. Some parents are, we've heard, using fake news via social media to pressure their school. School leaders are already learning to check all claims by parents before responding, though, which is, of course, good to do so. Many schools are reviewing their crisis continuity plans with the potential of future campus closures. Many are exploring the online platforms that work best for them and developing systems, structures, and practices to ensure that all members of their school community are well placed should there be any form of disruption to campus-based learning in the future. Many international schools have responded more resiliently and creatively than national schools. They may be seen by more affluent parents as more dependable education solutions for their children. Only time will tell, of course, on this one. According to reports that we've received recently, Hong Kong, Japan, Indonesia, the Philippines, Singapore, and so on are looking to phase the openings of schools from the end of May or early June. This is, of course, great news for the international community. On the other side of things, some governments are being more cautious, though, with the Cambodian ministry, as an example, releasing a statement to say that, that they expect schools to be physically open no later than the 1st November, i.e. the start of the Cambodian National Schools academic year. International schools that we've been speaking with are seeking clarity here, as they, of course, will want to physically open long before if possible. And we'll keep an eye on that as we move forward. ISU research is gathering intelligence on the longer-term impact to international schools of COVID-19. There is some thought fewer people will be able to afford premium international schooling post the pandemic. A global recession or even depression is on the horizon according to experts, and will inevitably cause disruptions in the international school sector. Areas with economies focused on tourism will have suffered greatly, with some heads mentioning, and I've spoken to someone this week, in fact, who mentioned that they'd lost in excess of 30% of their enrollment already. Countries where expat workers are highly prevalent will suffer, as transient regions will have a tough time replacing leaving expats due to visa restrictions on people returning. Schools with a high turnover of staff this year will struggle to get staff back in country, as we've mentioned on a couple of points throughout this webinar so far. New schools will have suffered greatly due to admissions restrictions as well. We're aware that there are a number of new schools opening throughout Asia Pacific, and we're currently writing a report called the Future Schools Report, named aptly. So we will be firing that over to you guys as soon as that one's written for further research. There may well be a fall in the supply of international teachers worldwide as well. Teachers may be less willing to live so far away from their home country, and family having experienced an extended period or time abroad with borders closed. And as previously mentioned as well, concerns for the well-being of student staff and the wider school community will continue for an extended period of time. However, as a result of the coronavirus, some families may be more cautious about sending their child to an overseas boarding school, as you've touched upon, perhaps in the UK or the US, preferring to keep their child closer to home and sending them to local international or private schools instead. So it could be that a number of schools benefit from this pause. The economic impact will reduce disposable income and choices, of course, private education being one of them. But we do know from previous crises, though, that education is valued extremely highly by many families, particularly throughout Asia. During the recession following the global financial crisis of 2008, many parents kept their children in international schools, even though they were financially impacted in other aspects of their lives. We'll, of course, wait to see if this is the case for today's international schools market. We're tracking these and other effects on the world's international schools market very closely. And, in terms of previous crises, we've written about that in our crisis white paper, which is available to all. ISC Research is directly supporting international schools as they manage their business strategies in the response to the impacts of coronavirus through a number of different ways, one of which being the ISC Research Positioning Service. The service enables schools to request all or only the elements that they need, but can include the latest market intelligence, pre and post coronavirus benchmarking to inform your admissions and or recruitment strategy, regional market insights from our field researchers, and marketing and admissions strategy audit. Get in touch with myself or any of the ISC team if you're interested in hearing more about this type of work that we're doing. And if you're, of course, an investor or an organization supporting international schools and need data or intelligence, get in touch, because we can help you too. So all that's left for me to say is thank you very much for listening. I welcome any questions, but if you'd rather email me directly, you can get in touch via my email address on the slide. So thanks so much.
Okay, thank you, Sam. As in, we have a number of questions in both the chat and the Q&A. So I think a lot of people are asking what currency are the fees reflected in, and that they seem a bit low.
Sorry, say again, please.
What currency are the fees reflected in?
Okay, so we reflect most our currencies in US dollars. And we're taking an average price point by country, and therefore the average in the UAE, for example, will look low, and China will look low because you've got to factor in, that you've got a huge number of kindergartens which are rolled up into that figure. You have a number of mid-market schools, you've got lower fee schools, so it's simply an average. So of course there are, being in China, you have schools in, 40, 50,000 US dollars, but the average is somewhat less, being that there are perhaps 100 premium schools in China, maybe a few more, but certainly a huge number further of mid-market and lower fee point schools. So it's an average.
Mm. And the other question with like a high number of votes is, are you expecting a number of international schools to fail over the next 2 years due to this crisis? If so,
yeah, it's a really interesting point, because I actually had this conversation with someone earlier today, and in short, I think there will be some schools in certain areas that will fall foul of the current circumstance, and it's unfortunate, but it's likely to happen based on a few different things. And I think a couple of those would be, number one, it depends on the location. If you're in a location that's heavily reliant on tourism for the economy, I think that's going to be that schools in those markets will see a huge impact. Markets where a lot of locals, a lot of foreign students attend international schools. So I'm based in Singapore here. And as I'm sure many of you are aware, international schools, bar 3, can't enroll Singaporean nationals. Therefore, they're totally reliant on an international student base. And countries, I'm not saying Singapore's going to, a lot of schools here are going to close, but I think countries where you have a large base of foreign students attending international schools, you may see more of an impact in those locations. Following on from that, you may see a number of difficulties in schools actually getting students into the country. I know that I was speaking to a school in Bali this week, and they were saying that they've already lost 10% of their future enrollment for next year because Bali is so heavily reliant on tourism as an economy, and it's really, of course there will be schools that survive there, but it will become a difficult market there for sure for a period, I can imagine. But there are countries, for example, like Malaysia and Thailand, who rely on a large body of local students, and therefore, though you may find that schools in those countries do very well, especially if you're a school which is offering a mid-market priced fee point, you may find that that you get some children from those premium schools who can no longer afford that level of schooling. So it's very dependent on the location, the type of schooling, and your price point, I think. But to answer the question, I think there will be casualties. And I think it's very dependent on how schools adapt in many respects to what's happening at the moment.
And the other one is on EdTech. Do you foresee tuition fees or pricing models changing with the advent of EdTech used in learning, and that schools may increasingly adopt remote learning?
Yes, I think that's a very good question. I think there are already schools out there prior to the coronavirus who are using external organisations to deliver distance learning because they didn't have the facility to allow for a certain element of the curriculum. So they allowed some of their students to study by distance learning with an external body. And I think that element of schooling is only going to grow. Absolutely. So I think EdTech is going to become more important, as we've already mentioned, as schools focus more on a synchronous and asynchronous style of education, because there are certainly benefits to an asynchronous style of education, which allows students to be more proactive and have more student agency, and focus on how they're going to achieve their goals individually, rather than being told how to do something and then go away and just have more memory skills and what have you. So yeah, I think EdTech will certainly become much more prevalent, and the advancement will become more user-friendly. The other thing is that tech will become more popular within schools, usage, because this has forced a huge number of teachers globally into using tech when previously they weren't upskilled enough to use it. So many teachers have been thrown in the deep end and now have been upskilled. So you'll be looking at a lot of schools, teachers who in the past would have steered clear, and now are thinking, well, actually I can use this different technology to access different things and to teach in different ways. So actually I think as a result of COVID-19, once we're past it, we may see a much more skilled collection of teachers in the market, especially within the tech field.
And
hope that answers the question, by the way. If you want me to touch on another point there, I'm happy to use it.
Yeah, there's a lot of EdTech questions. So there's this person who's asking which markets are more progressive when it comes to adopting EdTech over others.
Yeah, I think it depends on the market that you're situated in, and the likes of Singapore, for example, in the economy and the general country as a whole is very progressive with fintech and with technology in general, and therefore and the teachers and the parents are all very savvy towards the benefits tech can bring. So I think it depends on the location, on the ability to afford technology, on how technology actually migrates into certain curriculums as well. So I think it again depends heavily on curriculum location. I would suggest that someone like Laos may struggle with their with their internet connectivity. So I think it's very much dependent on the type of access you have. I'm aware that there are obviously schools in China who may struggle to access certain packages and what have you. So it's largely dependent on the location that you're based in and the forward-thinking nature of the school.
Mm. And another EdTech question, due to the move to online teaching and learning, are there any opportunities for EdTech companies? And if so, what are these opportunities? Or other types of education companies as well?
Well, I think, I certainly think there are opportunities out there. I think professional development's going to only grow online. I used to be a professional development coordinator in the Middle East, and we were always providing. Normally, we're providing courses, face to face in a school for 2 to 3 days, and I think that professional development's going to grow online, and a blended approach to professional development online is going to become more popular. Other schools I've been talking to are using this time to upskill other staff members, like TAs, all of the facilities people within the schools who are currently not really working. They're upskilling them on various aspects of the school and how it operates, and English language and what have you, to develop other areas of their cohort of their faculty, not just the teachers. So I think that people will be using tech to develop new ways of enhancing the offering at schools. I think entrepreneurship's a big thing. I think that entrepreneurship's only going to grow, and I think that online entrepreneurship will be massive. I think that the world recruitment as well, and this probably has taught us that we can perhaps run a decent admissions strategy online. So perhaps the admissions side of things will grow as an online entity where there were obviously packages online before, but I think that more schools will be looking at admissions online from an end-to-end process.
And a question maybe about COVID-19. What are the key observations that you have noticed in educational disruption and response in the APAC region with school closures from COVID-19?
So I think that a number of schools have had to revise their learning outcomes. So it's a very difficult entity it's a very difficult thing or a different thing to try and teach someone online as it is face-to-face. And you need to focus on a number of different things, such as, focusing on recordings to send across to students, making sure that children are self-reflecting, giving them their own agency for learning, allowing students to be proactive, allowing them more time management, which is a huge thing. So I think that teachers' expectations have needed to shift, and they're very different now. So again, I think that these are key areas that have changed within the schools. I think that time management is probably a massive thing, and I think this will probably allow for schools to look at ways in which they can reduce costs by offering more distance learning programs.
Mm. And so, in your view, how long is the recovery for schools that are impacted by COVID-19?
Again, I think that's completely dependent on the region. As I've said already, I think Hong Kong, Singapore, Thailand, and a few other countries around the area here are, in Southeast Asia in particular, are reopening as of end of May, early June. I think that those schools are going to be phased in, and I'm not sure that we'll see a full cohort of students back in schools in September, October. I think it's going to be a bit further down the line. So I think that blended learning approach of where teachers will teach in schools but also distance learning will become part of the norm for the beginning of the next academic year, and certainly schools will be impacted for at least the coming year in many different ways, including pathways to universities, how students are going to cope with going to university, their decisions in which the universities they choose, and therefore if decisions are changing surrounding which universities they go to, then perhaps parents will focus more on sending their children to other schools in the first place, if there's an impact in the ultimate goal of getting their child into a specific university. So I think that there are short-term changes to focus upon, such as not being allowed to physically enter the school, but also long-term changes in the fact that I think parents long-term will change a number of their thoughts around which schools they choose and which universities they choose, and so on. So yeah, I think there are a couple of different things to think about there.
And like somebody asked a question whether there's a trend of in terms of providing refunds, because a lot of families are demanding it because of the switch to virtual learning.
Yeah, so we've heard of schools reducing fees for this semester now, so the final semester, but also freezing or keeping these fees here, but then offering a reduction in the fees for the first semester of next year. We're also hearing that school fees are going to be frozen. We're hearing about help for those parents who are unfortunately in a difficult position where they can't actually can't afford to send their child to the school anymore. So there are bursaries. The level at which reductions of fees are being pushed forward, we're looking at anywhere between, we've heard 15% to 50%. And as I mentioned, I think in the webinar already, it's very dependent on how schools have managed to operate during this period. So if some schools have been largely able to teach their student body outside of school via distance learning, doing regular, the time, the kind of the schedule, the curriculum on a weekly basis, the time frame is very similar, but it's just online. I think, as I mentioned, those schools have probably they've got more of an ability to kind of push back and say, actually, our fees shouldn't be reduced quite so much. But for some schools who haven't been able to adapt to a distance learning structure, then I think they're going to have to reduce. The other thing is that we've heard of a couple of schools in China, as I mentioned, so far, and I'm sure that there'll be other regions as well, actually extending the term right into the end of July. So there are, as you can imagine, some teachers, or a lot of teachers, aren't particularly pleased with that. So it's going to be very difficult to manage, the parents and the teachers to make sure that everything's closely aligned. But certainly to reduce the summer holiday after a very tough period for many teachers out there is a tall order. But certainly, I assume essential for some schools out there.
Right. Moving forward from COVID-19, I think we see more schools are adapting their curriculum to EdTech. So then somebody's asking, how will accreditation work for such programs?
Yeah, I mean, very difficult to tell at this stage, actually, to be honest. As you're aware, most schools have cancelled most examining bodies have cancelled exams for this year, and they're reliant on schools either using mock exams, or coursework plus coursework for their results, or average results over a certain year for individual assessment. We're certainly researching this at the moment, and that's something that we'll be looking at, including in some of our free reports coming up over the next couple of months. So whoever is interested in receiving more information surrounding that subject, please feel free to get in touch with me, and I'll happily get back to you as and when we have more information surrounding that question.
And another question related to EdTech, how do you sort of manage the consumer expectations that EdTech solutions need to be priced lower than the traditional model of learning, and how will it impact the education industry in general?
Sorry, so am I right in saying you're asking how suppliers will be impacted by the reduction of the cost of their products, or?
Yeah, because I think consumers, like this person is asking, consumer expectation that EdTech solutions will be priced lower than the traditional model of physical face-to-face learning.
Yeah, well, I think first of all, there are obviously a lot of players entering the market at the moment, and there's a huge number. Speaking to schools, there are a huge number of suppliers contacting schools on a daily basis, and absolutely, the mailboxes are just filled up with invites to use this product for free or for 50% discount per month or what have you. So so schools have been inundated with offers. Firstly, and I think the key thing there is to make sure that when as a supplier, when you're getting in touch with the school, you're keeping it very clear and concise, and you're making it very easy to understand what the product is, because these schools are implementing a whole host of new products into their strategy, and if they've got a product already that they're using which can do a good enough job, there are some schools out there that would be loath to kind of adopt a new platform with a whole bunch of extra platforms that they've already kind of implemented into their strategy. So first and foremost, I think that there are a lot of different products being offered, and I think it's important to offer something that's clear and concise and easy to adopt within a school. So in terms of price points, are you asking me whether schools, at which stage schools will kind of need to increase, or at which stage fee points for products will go up? Or
Right. I think the person is asking, so are we expecting the price, like the tuition fees, to go down with sort of EdTech coming into?
Oh, I see what you're saying. Okay, so yes, I think it potentially will, depending on the level of usage of EdTech. I think you look at some schools which are, say you're running a K-12 curriculum, a program in your school, so you've got right through from kindergarten to grade 12. The children in lower grades are less likely to be able to cope with an online learning platform in comparison to the children in higher grades. And some A-level programs out there, I think Harrow are already offering a distance learning A-level, which would be classified as a lot cheaper than the likes of, if you were to go to, for example, if you were to go and do your A-levels or the IBDP here in Singapore at Dulwich, or at North London opening this year. So certainly I think there will be organically a development of online learning platforms from schools which will act as a cheaper option. I think it's important to note, though, that one thing that schools have noticed is that, and many thought that distance learning was the future for international schools. But now that people are using distance learning as a strategy, which has been forced upon them, of course, many realise that the face-to-face tangible contact that schools were used to having is absolutely essential in many respects for children, and it really benefits the learning. So I don't think too many schools will be moving to a fully distance learning program anytime soon. Of course, as I mentioned, there are programs out there like the Harrow one that I've already mentioned, but I think it will be that schools will look to do a blended approach rather than all or nothing.
Okay, maybe we'll address some questions about sort of market entry and expansion. So somebody asked whether, would you foresee more local involvement in international schools, academic especially in Southeast Asia, due to sort of school closures or restricted places during this pandemic?
So with regards to that question, do you mean local students attending international schools? I think that's what's being asked there.
I guess local, as I'm not sure if the person could sort of raise their hand, I can unmute him, but as what I assume from this question is more of the international schools operation, like local governments or schools.
I see. So involved in the legislation of international schooling. Mm. Yeah, so I think that changes largely with the growth of the local population attending international schools. And we've seen, in like Saudi Arabia, for example, Malaysia, Thailand, where a large body of local students want to attend international schools now. The government has, in those specific countries mentioned, and a whole many others, have now, the governments have become much more interested in the inner workings of international schools, because they want to make sure, you know, and they have a vested interest in the students from the local population receiving a, you know, a strong internet education, but also holding on to, you know, the cultural, the language, and the historical identity of their countries. And I think, you know, as previously stated within the webinar, I think that this is only going to grow as the local population within Southeast Asia and further afield as well in Asia attends international schools. I think it will be interesting to see what happens when, you know, a large body of, you know, students from the likes of China and South Korea, Indonesia, and Singaporeans attend a school in Malaysia, and so you have a very Asian-focused expat population in a single school in somewhere like Malaysia, and how they adapt their curriculum to suit the large, most common student nationalities within those individual campuses, which are not local, but also not Western. And I think that's an interesting piece of research that certainly needs to be focused upon over the next couple of years.
And sort of on partnerships, is there expectation that some schools will struggle to be financially sustainable during this period, and therefore there's this opportunity to merge with other schools? And with that, or which geographies or type of schools do you see this trend in the next 1 or 2 years? Yeah,
I think if you've got a school in a very in a very transient area that's kind of premium in nature, then you may struggle for enrollment. I think this is a good time for a potentially good time for acquisition. If you're a strong group, or you're an investor who's looking to get involved in the international schools market, I think, of course, that depends on you know, your appetite for either going for a mid-market or a premium school. But there may well be some schools in the market which look to move on the school or campus to another party over the next year, I would suggest, depending on the location. I think there'll be a lot of schools in the likes of Bangkok, for example, which are safe, because a lot of those schools will be heavily focused on the local population, or Chinese nationals migrating overseas. So it really, again, depends on key areas. But whoever that question was asked by, please get in touch and we can have a chat further about the specific locations that you're talking about. I'll be happy to have a chat with you about that.
There's also a number of questions on accreditation programs. So what is the standing of international programs like IB in these regions in the light of COVID situation? And you know, whether Cambridge or IB will reduce their fees for membership?
This is something that I don't think anyone has a clear read on at the moment. I think that it's something that we're certainly researching. We're speaking to IB, we're speaking to Cambridge, we're speaking to a number of other bodies, but at the moment we're not in a position to kind of say specifically what's happening there. I think again, that's something that we'll be releasing over the coming couple of weeks to month, as we get a clearer picture of how the IB and what have you are going to operate moving forward. I'd suggest that there will likely have to be some kind of movement if schools are having to reduce their fees down considerably, and that's not just amongst the IB and what have you, but amongst all entities operating within schools.
And I think just now you also briefly mentioned about recruitment. So somebody asked, could you sort of briefly share about the trends that you may expect in staffing recruitment for schools, like let's say upskilling training for locals?
So there are a number of schools out there who already had a very strong program in place to work with expats or locals in their schools to upskill and to train to become a teacher in an international setting. So I know British School Muscat has a very strong program that's very widely regarded as being a very strong program. So feel free to jump on their website and have a look at that program, because I think that Clive Vatcher over there does a great job. There are a number of school groups who are looking to bring in a higher body of local teaching people. I think countries like India have a very strong level of teaching staff, and so there are markets like that which inevitably will end up being tapped into. But I think as we've mentioned, with schools wanting to increase their emphasis on local culture, and languages and histories, I think bringing in local teachers to teach alongside and with a body of expatriate teachers, whether they're from the West or whether they're Asian expats, I think that kind of amalgamation of teaching staff will benefit schools in more ways than just at fee point. And that it will be a benefit in terms of the overall package a school can offer to parents who will likely in the future be much more interested in having an international curriculum with a local context.
And maybe one last question we'll address because of a limited time. Do you think schools should start offering two types of admissions? One that's completely online learning and the other one that's blended learning or combination with different fee structures?
So I think that they should. I don't know. I don't really know, to be honest. I think it's a difficult one to say. I think there are certainly benefits if you're pushed for if fee point is an issue, but you want to go to a premium international school for your child to get a very strong education with proven gateways to universities. Then a distance learning program such as the one that Harrow has released, that may be or is releasing. Sorry, I'm not sure whether it's released or releasing at the moment, so I need to get back to you on that. But I think that would be very well sought after by many. But whether it's hugely beneficial to the students that are attending, I'm not so sure. I don't know. I think it's difficult to say, and it's not right for me to say either way. But I know a lot of people, teachers, head teachers, and other people involved in the industry have been saying how they feel personally that that face-to-face contact, that tangible contact in classroom with other students, that ability to offer leadership opportunities and what have you, that's really invaluable in comparison to how you can offer those similar skills online. And I think that tangible aspect and offering a blended approach is perhaps going to be more desirable in the short term as people adapt to this new way of learning.
Maybe a last note on ISC research. I think a lot of attendees are asking whether you guys are monitoring the reopening, the closing of schools around the world, and whether there's updates on your blog, because they're trying to. Yeah.
So if you go onto our website, we update it every week. We have a spreadsheet or a page where we have all of the key countries globally, and it states whether countries are open for international schools partially, fully, or whether they're closed, and any information surrounding school closures and policies and what have you as well. So please feel free to jump on our website and have a look at that, because we use it as a very strong resource, and I know that there are a lot of people in schools and entities who are using it to good effect.
Thank you, Sam. Is there anything that you want to say before we do a wrap up of this presentation?
No, I think thanks very much to everyone for joining me today. It's been a pleasure to present, and I hope that we've managed to, as an organisation, present some interesting findings. So hopefully, if you have any more questions, I'll be happy to answer those. But mainly, stay safe, and hopefully this will all be over before we know it. But thank you very much to Informer as well for having me on. Much appreciated.
Okay, thank you, Sam. For the rest of our attendees, so kindly help us to fill out this post-webinar survey to improve on future webinars. Thank you so much for the wonderful presentation, Sam.
Thanks.